Thank you very much indeed, and it's great to be here. Nice to be back in London after 2.5 months or so, having moved to Rome. I do need to start by saying that I did put this presentation on the standard PowerPoint template of my current organization, but it doesn't represent any view of FAO. This represents work that I've been doing over the past 20 years, really. And it's perfectly well aligned, of course, with the work of FAO, but please don't take this as anything formal from FAO in terms of policy. So I'm here to talk about what I've spent the last 20 years exploring, which is food systems and diets. So my entry point into the world of food systems, I'm now director of the Division of Food Systems at FAO. My entry point into food systems was from the health side, which is clearly different from some others' entry points. And we all come from different spaces and different entry points, and I'm a great believer that we all need to be uniting and working together. But it does come with a certain set of assumptions and expectations depending on what entry point you come from, and mine is this starting point. And that means that I tend to take a very people-centered approach. When I think about the people of the food system, I'm thinking about 8 billion people. In other words, everybody who eats, every single one of whom is part of the food system. So what do healthy diets look like for the people of the food system, the citizens of the world who eat? Now, there's a lot of scientific debate about this, but generally speaking, food-based dietary guidelines, which are promulgated in around 100 or over 100 countries now, set out, broadly speaking, what this looks like. And I don't need to talk about this in any detail, but lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of legumes, modest, minimal amounts of animal-sourced foods, enough for health for those who aren't vegans or vegetarians, and whole grains, and junk food limited to a small part of the plate. And these are 3 examples, but there are many different examples of food-based dietary guidelines which tell us what healthy diets are in those particular country contexts. And we also know from a ton of scientific research that diets are absolutely not healthy. And they're not diverse, and they're not healthy. I should mention that dietary diversity is absolutely critical. Sorry for packing the slide full of so much data here, but there is so much data that tells us about the problem. Whether it's infants not even having enough of our dietary diversity for their growth and development, well, whether it's the populations of substantial numbers of countries not eating diets that contain all the 5 recommended food groups, so that's another dietary diversity problem. Whether it's low vegetable consumption among adolescents who are nevertheless consuming a lot of sugary drinks, whether it's high intake of highly processed foods, and just overall inadequate intake of fruits and vegetables. These are very, very widespread problems. Now, in the work that I've done over the years, I've come to 4 critical conclusions. That if we are going to redesign the food system in a way that actually supports healthy diets, we actually need to start with people. So rather than saying, well, we need to change consumer demand, so they reduce meat intake or they reduce junk food intake, and we just need to reduce the demand, we need to understand the realities of people's lives that shape why they eat what they do. That's the first point. The second point is that it's not only people that influence what the food system produces. Again, there tends to be this view that if we just reduce consumer demand, then that will reduce demand from the food system. But the food system actually shapes what people eat. We must remember that there's a 2-way intersection there. And that at this intersection are food environments. I'll come back to that in a minute. Thirdly, it's very evident that food systems are not designed to promote healthy diets. And fourthly, the good news is there's masses and masses that can be done to change this situation. So firstly, identifying how to redesign food systems means we first have to understand the people that eat. And this is an unpublished piece of work that I'll be publishing in due course. that I was working on in my previous role at the Centre for Food Policy, where we were pulling together all of the different elements that influence and set the conditions of what shapes what people eat. And the absence of any of these conditions simply make it harder for people to eat healthier. It's a hard thing to do. I'm not going to go through all of these here, but you can see them in front of you. And the key point that I'm trying to make is that these realities of people's lives, many of them, not all of them, but many of them are shaped by the food systems, most particularly food environments. So how easy different foods are available, the kinds of prompts in food environments and the promotions in these food environments, the cost of food, but also the trust that we have in those who sell us our food. These are all aspects in food environments. They are shaped by the food system itself, which in turn then shapes what people eat. So that's the first major influence. The second is that billions of people work in the food system. And for those people, the material factors that shape their income, how busy they are, the time that they have, how they get to look after or not look after their kids, are shaped by the fact that they work in the food system and the nature of labor in the food system. And so that then shapes financial insecurity, time, all of these other elements that influence what people eat. So the food environment relates to everybody, the 8 billion people in the world, and the second factor influences the billions of people who work in the food system. And then what happens is that all of these factors from the food system shape what people eat, and then it becomes habituated and acculturated, and you become used to it, and then it becomes very hard to change. And then people say, people just like eating meat. People just like eating junk food. But that has been built up over years of this influence that has built up over time. So food systems are not designed to support healthy diets because they are not designed to create healthy food environments. Let me give 3 examples from different parts of the food supply chain, the food chain. First of all, farmers are not incentivized to produce foods for health. No one is coming up to them and saying, hey, what you need to produce is healthy. No, you need to produce something that's calories, but not necessarily healthy. And the reason that they're saying that isn't just because it's because the incentives aren't there to encourage that. So, for example, if you look at what was called cosmetic standards, marketing and retailer standards, which could be private standards or public standards by government or supermarkets or whatever, they say, right, in order to sell fruit in my supermarket, it needs to be clean, it needs to be a certain shape or whatever. And we know what that means in terms of food loss and waste. But no one has ever thought to say, by the way, it also needs to be delicious for kids. Even though the fundamental purpose of the food system is to nourish people. It's more important to get the right shape than it is to be delicious. An example from supply chains, again, the incentives aren't lined up. Absolute marvel of modern efficiency. But it's more efficient if you're a huge agribusiness producing corn, you create more value. You can get multiple value streams out of corn. You can create oils from them, you can create degerminated flour, animal feed, sweeteners. So you get multiple value streams out of one grain, or you get a whole grain. What are you going to go for? You're going to go for the multiple value streams. So that's a direct economic disincentive for keeping grains whole, which we know are better for health. And then at the level of people, we know that large corporations and many others just say, well, we're just responding to consumer demand. And they are responding to consumer demand at that particular point in time. But that, again, doesn't take into account the fact that those demands and that has built up over time. If you're a kid and you're exposed to unhealthy food environments, you learn to like that food and then demand it. So there's a short-term issue, but it's built up over a longer term. So there are some examples about how we could start to redesign food systems to promote healthier diets much more effectively. So the next point that I'd like to make then is around people who work in food systems labor. Now, a recent report from FAO, excellent report, I have to say, really you should read it, which is about food systems and the status of women in agri-food systems. quite astonishing reading, does a brilliant job of pulling the data together. And it says kind of what we already know to a certain extent about women's labor in food systems, in production, and then of course it relates also to processing in retail, in informal markets. Women work throughout the food system. I mean, food is really built off the backs of women, if you think about it. But there's something else that those women do too. They tend to have responsibility for feeding their families. Rightly or wrongly, it's an expression of our very deep gender inequalities that we see in all countries around the world. And because they're so busy working in the fields and doing all of the things that one needs to do in underpaid, often hazardous labor, that reduces their financial insecurity, it reduces the time, and it reduces their headspace to say, oh yes, now I'm gonna get home and I'm gonna, in my wonderful kitchen, produce a lovely food for my family. That's just not people's realities. That's not women's realities. And that has an impact on their nutritional status as women, and it has an effect on the nutritional status of their families. So this is critical. We must not forget the billions of people, including billions of women who work in the food system, and how that affects their diets and the diets of their children. And this is just to illustrate this point, that you soon start to get into this issue about trade-offs in the food system, where because they are underpaid, the people who work in the food system, as pointed out in this report and subject to inequalities, that's enabled one of the reasons why food has become cheaper over time. So that's enabled people to afford more food, including healthier food, I have to say. But for them, they're then not able to access this more affordable food because they don't have the money. So this is where these difficult trade-offs come into play around the cost of food and these different elements of food systems. And then, of course, issues around environmental sustainability, animal welfare, all of these issues then come into play in working out some of these tricky trade-offs. But the good news is that lots can be done. It's not written here, but the first thing that can be done is for a unity of people to come together who are working on the environmental aspects of food systems, the health aspects of food systems, the economic aspects of food systems, the financing aspects of food systems, to come together as one community and start to really say, how can we work out these tricky trade-offs together? How can we all understand each other's languages? We all speak different languages. And how can we actually come together as a system to identify maybe where we need to make some compromises? We will need to compromise if we're going to come to solutions. And that's really important. And I have to say, that's why I'm incredibly privileged to be in the role I am at FAO now, which is one of the tasks ahead of trying to bring that system together, working closely, of course, with the UN Food Systems hub as well, and feeding in the technical expertise into the hub. When it comes to specific actions, these are some work that I've done in the past, where we pull together the different policies and actions that can be taken to UN food systems for all, for healthy diets for all. And these actions can be taken at many different places in the food system by many different actors, and of course are very context specific. This is like a menu of what can be done. The point is there a lot that can be done. And a more recent piece of work that we did in my previous role, we mapped out the co-benefits and the synergies between actions for healthy diets and environmental actions. So we're trying to say, right, how can we actually intervene to improve the quality of diets while we're also benefiting the environment, also benefiting environmental prosperity? This is the million-dollar question that we all need to be coming around and working together on. But what we need to remember in all of this is let's not forget the people that eat, and remember that they really are at the center of our food system. And when we're designing food systems, we need to remember that those people have realities too. And it simply isn't enough to say they just need to change what they eat. We need to be working with other systems, with social systems, with health systems, with economic systems, with media systems, all of these other factors that shape what people eat. And if we start working with all of these other systems, then we'll gradually be able to shift consumer demand, so I shouldn't use that word consumer, demand from people in order to then start to create a pull so that people themselves are saying, yes, we not only want to eat healthily, which we know they do, by the way, but we are able to because our lives and the realities of our lives enable us to do that. Thank you very much.